Welcome back to Morning Joe, 8:33 in the morning. A live picture of the White House and here in New York City. If you're just waking up, the spread is 224 to 213 in favor of Joe Biden. No winner yet declared in the presidential election, with 9 states still out there, either too early or too close to call even this morning. Let's go back to the big board and Steve Kornacki. Steve, last we saw you were getting some new data in for Georgia. I want to let you dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, just to update there, because we had seen some numbers from Fulton County. The story here is Trump leading statewide by just over 100,000. There are just a few pockets of, sort of deep Democratic support where we're still getting a lot of vote in. Fulton is one of them. And the question here is how much vote is left there in Fulton. And what I was seeing is about 10 minutes ago when we were doing this was the potentially there wasn't any, or there basically wasn't much, vote at all there, just a scattering of a couple hundred votes. The short answer is we're still not sure. There could be an error here from the data provider, or there could be a new estimate here that the vote that's left in Fulton County just isn't that much. So we're still trying to get clarification on that. It's a critical question, though. Fulton County, where Atlanta is, huge potential source of support for Joe Biden if there's a lot of vote left there, and he's somebody trying to make up a 100,000 vote gap statewide right now. So we'll keep an eye on that. We'll also, while we're here, why don't we take a look south here of Georgia into Florida. This is one we spent an awful lot of time on early last night on election night, and this picture slowly came into focus. Donald Trump actually getting a solid victory here, 3.5 points in Florida. That's bigger, significantly bigger than his 2016 margin. And I can remember being here at the board when I think one of the big reasons why it came in, it was Miami-Dade County. This is the final, close to the final vote out of Miami-Dade County. You see, Biden wins it by 7 points. Compare that to 4 years ago when Clinton won Miami-Dade by 30, from 30 all the way down to 7. And, of course, we saw this in the polls ahead of time here, the potential for this Hispanic voters, specifically Cuban-American voters, a big part of the population in South Florida, in Miami-Dade County. Donald Trump made big gains there. This is supposed to be a huge Democratic vote-producing county in Florida. Instead, Donald Trump made Joe Biden sweat there. That's not supposed to happen for a Democrat. It's a big reason why Biden lost Florida. It's a big reason why Trump wins it by 3.5 points at this moment.
Yeah, you look at just the raw vote total. Donald Trump in Miami-Dade alone picked up almost 200,000 more votes this time than he did 4 years ago. Steve, we'll be back to you in just a moment. Joining us now with more on this, Democratic strategist, founder of Nuestro PAC, Chuck Rocha, and politics and journalism professor at Morgan State University, politics editor at The Grio, and an MSNBC political contributor, Jason Johnson. Gentlemen, good morning to you both. Chuck, let me start with you because we were talking about Miami-Dade. What do you see as you dig through those numbers? What happened to Joe Biden there?
Let's talk about what happened there. I think it's super interesting. I've been doing this for 31 years, and I've never seen such a dramatic swing. But let's clarify something. Joe Biden won the Latino vote statewide in Florida. And if he would have performed at those same numbers that Steve just described in Miami-Dade, Donald Trump would still win because we lost white voters by a larger percent as well. So we can't lay this all at the feet of blame on Latinos. He underperformed across the board. And I'll say it again, Donald Trump won a majority of white seniors and a majority of white college educated. But there was definitely a problem in Miami-Dade. And I've been the Mexican redneck crying wolf around here for a long time about the Latino vote. So much so I wrote a book about it this summer outlining what we should be doing to start earlier in these Latino communities, building a narrative to push back on the socialism argument, but also meet people where they are, that Mr. Johnson actually talks about all the time, with people who look like our community, being in the community with PACs and leadership run by Latinos. There's not another woke white consultant that's going to save us or fix this problem.
And all the people said, amen. Hey, Jason, I'll tell you, the message that really worked, I heard it in Florida, heard it from Cuban Americans, and heard it from other people in Miami-Dade. That socialism argument that Joe Biden is a socialist, which, of course, certainly seems laughable to those of us who have followed his career and seen him often attacked by Democrats for being too close to credit card companies, too close to the big banks. But it worked with Cuban Americans. It worked with immigrants from Venezuela. It worked with immigrants from Nicaragua.
Joe, I do wonder about that, and I'm looking forward to digging through some of that data, because if you actually believe this is not Bernie Sanders, it's Joe Biden. If you actually believe that Joe Biden is a socialist, you were never going to vote for a Democrat anyway. That's kind of like white voters who are like, Joe Biden's going to defund the police. He picked a DA as his VP. The guy is not about to defund the police. So I think as we dig through those numbers, I wonder if when you talk to some of these native Spanish-speaking or Spanish-speaking in their homes when they grow up voters, if they're going to say the socialism was what actually made them concerned about Joe Biden, or did they just like Donald Trump? But I think the bigger issue is this, and I'm glad Chuck mentioned this, because I've been talking about this all along. This is just like during the primary, where you had a large number of African-American analysts and reporters who were like, look, we got to see what happens in South Carolina, or what happened in Georgia in 2018. There need to be more experts and more journalists and more analysts with deep relationships and connections to Spanish-speaking and Latino-American communities, so we can disaggregate these things. Because in the same way that Joe Biden may have underperformed in Miami-Dade, he did a fantastic job if you look what happened in Arizona. He had mixed results in what happened in Texas. So I think this hopefully will be the end of anyone ever saying people of color, and hopefully will be the end of us just saying Latino in general. We'll talk about Puerto Rican Americans and Central American immigrants and Cuban Americans, and make those distinctions both by color and language and race.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that obviously we've been saying here for quite some time. In fact, years ago, I started explaining to Democrats that they couldn't look at the Hispanic vote, the Latino vote, as monolithic. They couldn't say, oh, it's all about immigration. It's all about this issue. It's not. It's an extraordinarily diverse population. And it depends. Like, for instance, in Arizona, and Caddy, I know you got a question for Chuck, but it's like Arizona. Joe Arpaio in Arizona, and other moves by the Republican Party in Arizona have turned off Latino voters there.
Yeah, I mean, and you look at what's happened down in Florida, and if you ever needed a reminder that the Latino vote was not monolithic, we are waking up this morning and getting that. And Chuck, you made the point that actually Joe Biden took the Latino vote in other parts of Florida, a majority, and there's such a distinction. I wonder if you think to what extent events outside of the United States, and we watched Venezuela, we watched Donald Trump invite the Venezuelan opposition leader, Juan Guaido, to the State of the Union address. And I remember at the time thinking, is this a Florida play? Because this goes down well, not just with Venezuelan Americans, of which there are a growing number in Florida, it also goes down well with Cuban Americans. And to lump that group in with people who've come from Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, it seemed, Chuck, naive on the part of outsiders to think they have the same voting priorities.
Katie, I think you raise a great point, and I think it's very relevant. And Donald Trump was smart, at least his campaign was. And I can't believe I just said those two words together. But down in Miami, Donald Trump and his team started really early, and they started having these messages, Katie, and talking about these visits ahead of time. I would remind everybody of my tweet around the RNC convention when I said, walk past this, Democrats, as you're at your own peril. One Cuban after another on stage, naturalizing people in the White House. Sure, was it disgusting? Did he take advantage? Yes, but it was smart politically because he knew he could eat into the numbers. Get this. Donald Trump started advertising in Spanish in Miami-Dade in the beginning of June, spending $500,000 a week. Joe Biden didn't get up there till the end of July. So that was 6 weeks almost unanswered. And Joe Scarborough knows this better than anybody. You only get one chance to make a first impression, and then it became a steady drumbeat. And those ads were not about how great Donald Trump was for the Latino community. It was, can you really trust Joe Biden? And then at the end, you saw all this disinformation campaign in Spanish that led on, can you trust Joe Biden? To Mr. Johnson's point, then you just saw all of this cultural competency go out the window because they knew exactly who their target was.
And it looks like a bunch of that stuck. Eddie Glaude, hop in here.
So, Jason, let me ask you this question. We talk about the Cuban vote in Miami-Dade. What do you make of African-American voters in this county? I mean, when I look at those numbers and I see that decline, it's important to kind of talk about Cuban Americans, but it's also important for us to see how did African Americans turn out, especially when we compare Miami-Dade to what we saw in Broward. So talk a little bit about what you see on the ground there, if you see anything.
Well, one, and I think this is a good point, because also you can still talk about people who identify as black and still talk about Cubans, because there's Afro-Cubans, right, who will make it very clear that white Cubans subject them to racism no different than sort of white people. So I think that's part of what we have to understand. There was never going to be, and I certainly, Eddie, no one could ever find tape of me suggesting that Joe Biden was going to do as well with black voters as Barack Obama did in 2008 and 2012. He held his ground, but he was always going to have difficulty because the enthusiasm level for many African Americans had been suppressed by years and years and years of disinformation from the Biden campaign through Facebook. We saw that they had these plans back in 2016, and also the ability to demonize Senator Kamala Harris as his VP. So all of those things were going to be challenges. But I think it's very important when we look at the lower numbers for Latinos, Biden underperforming with Latinos, Biden underperforming with African Americans. I think we also have to remember to put the focus in the right place, though. This is about white folks. This is about white people who saw a president who was corrupt and sexist and violent and mismanaged an entire pandemic that's killed over 230,000 people by the election, and they said, I want some more of that. So even if every single black person and every single Latino person had come out and said, hey, we're going to support Joe Biden, it wouldn't have been enough to overcome the number of white people who are okay with Trump and his mini version of Trumpism, which is DeSantis, who was also responsible for some of the voter suppression in the state, which kept black and Latino voters from getting to the polls.
Well, and Jason, there's just always been, there's been in the state of Florida a built-in advantage, and it's been a built-in advantage that the Republicans have built over the past 25, 30 years. And Chuck, obviously, there are a lot of white voters, older white voters, that like what they see in Donald Trump. At the same time, the Biden campaign was telling us 2-3 months ago they were really concerned about the numbers they saw from Hispanic males and black males, that Donald Trump was doing far better among Hispanic males and black males than Republican voters in the past. And they really still don't have a good answer for why that is.
And Joe, I think you're exactly right. I also think we have to separate Florida from the rest of the country, especially when you talk about Latinos. And you know that. You've been talking about it for weeks on Morning Joe, and you've been right. They just act totally different. We say monolith and all of that. But in Arizona, Joe Biden's going to win 71% of the vote and pick up lots of Latino men. Will it be as good as Latinas? No, we've seen this huge divide between men and women in the Latino community. But I think we always, as we talk about the Latino vote, and much like you've talked about, we have to set Florida to the side. It's not just about the Cubans. Cubans are only 1/4 of the Latino vote, Puerto Ricans, Mexicans, and all of the different nations of origin that we talk about. But I think there's one big major thing that we're not talking about, and that's all the outside money that got into Florida and other places. I'm currently tracking in the top 12 super PACs $1 billion that was spent trying to persuade white persuadable voters, while only 1.5% of that actually went to Latino groups on the ground to communicate. And I think that is a big deal, because Joe Biden will show that he actually spent more money than Hillary Clinton talking to Latinos in Spanish. But the big difference here is that spending by the outside group that was hyper-focused on these white people, getting them from the Donald Trump back to the old Obama days. And I see that being very underreported.
All right, Chuck Rocha and Jason Johnson, thank you both for your analysis this morning.
Thank
Such
you
an
guys so
important
much.
day. Up next, we're going to check in with Steve Kornacki at the big board and get the bottom line as to the state of the race right now. Keep it right here on Morning Joe.
An election night like no other, and this is the thing I gotta say all night.
State by state and county by county.
There's gonna be a range of possibilities here.
For the election of our lifetimes, nobody